And actually, this is going to be part 3 of my vlog on privilege. And I'm just doing this because I want to clarify or make sure that this is well understood for me. And this is specifically with race privilege. I have even gotten privilege as a white man, even on my little island of Jamaica. Listen to Jesse Genda sometime if you haven't. But on that island of Jamaica, there are blacks and dark brown, so Fitzpatrick 5s and 6s. One guy in particular who referred to me as a white man, called me a white man. He wanted to know something, and he came to me. That was the first time I ever really experienced white privilege, because for him, I was white enough. There's no doubt about that. And then there was another Jamaican who also saw me as white enough, and for that guy, he wanted me to explain something about some new cruise ships that they were trying to have in Jamaica. So I sat and listened and helped them. And there was actually even a third time where it was also because of the color of my skin, being one of the whiter people in Jamaica, where I got some white privilege. And this one was a guy who was trying to build something, and he needed some assistance with the measurements and understanding how to measure that correctly. And, as a result of my ability, I was able to help him. But the other privileges I do get is, even as an Asian, I get some privilege. Some people do realize I have some Asian roots, and I do know I looked more Asian or chinky or whatever you want to call it when I was a baby, based on stories. The chinkiness really has to do with the eyes. It's not a stupid slander necessarily. So epicanthal folds, but specifically not the folds. It really has to do with the distance between the upper and I think lower palpebra, if I'm correct on that terminology. I really still have to consult an anatomy book for these terminologies right now. But, those eyelids, the upper and lower eyelid. So, I've gotten that. And, the other way I get Asian privilege is when I talk about my Asian heritage. I start getting some privilege, usually from Asians that way. And maybe some white girls. And some blacks, but not all. There's a lot of blacks who kind of degrade me for recognizing my multiracialness too. So it's not just a white thing or a black thing. It's definitely a human thing on some level. And then I also get privilege as a brown person. I know amongst Indians I fit in quite a bit, although they do notice the difference in my hair, because they tend to have straighter hair than I. But I still get some brown privilege from them because of my skin color and my complexion. And then amongst the blacks, funny enough, sometimes I get black privilege, but sometimes I don't, because I'm not the blackest one. When it's really a room of black, like Fitzpatrick 6 Congoid or maroon people, and they want a black, they usually won't choose me to represent the blackest of the blacks. If they want somebody to represent black for other reasons, then yeah, I might get chosen. But I do get black privilege in many other contexts, even amongst non-blacks specifically, such as whites, or any group that doesn't want to be considered black. They'll definitely point to me in those situations where I can take the lead on so many things as a black man, especially when there's not one who's blacker. But with me, usually there's always someone blacker. I'm just not laughing. Like, I have to work hard to be the blackest person in the room, meaning really use aversion, or I guess the opposite of aversion. I just don't know what that specific word, it might be proversion, for instance. But I definitely have felt the difference. I have been the blackest in the room on some occasions, but it's not often. Even in Canada, on my soccer team, Streetsville soccer team, there was Andre, who was a Congoid 6, right there on our soccer team. It was Andre. I was probably the next blackest. And then this guy, Steven Rayo, who was Italian or something like that, Italian-Canadian. And then the other, majority white kids. And so I still wasn't the blackest, which is interesting. And I got to Orlando. Interesting enough, though, on my soccer team in Orlando, I was probably the blackest kid on our team, and that was Seminole Soccer Club. Although I didn't really feel black. I really never felt black. I feel black because black is important for Jamaica, but I don't really feel black as a human. I actually probably feel more Asian and in some ways Spanish or Hispanic, although I'm definitely an English man. So that's why it gets a little confusing. As I was going through this process of cognizance and self-actualization, I started noticing that there were some days where I felt white, there were some days where I felt brown, and there were some days where I felt black. And in terms of other words that are racial terms that I use and know I fit into, there's some days where I felt chinky. There's some days where I felt like a nigger. I don't really ever feel like a cracker, though. That is one interesting thing. There are some, like, I can understand some of that thinking, but I don't think I really could get to that, partly because of my skin color and my human phenotype. It'd be difficult. I'd look completely stupid looking like a brown man trying to be like a Caucasian as a cracker. That just doesn't make sense to me. But I think it happens. Dave Chappelle has given some interesting stories or comedy about that, which really sparked my thinking. Really, I enjoyed listening to. He's one who's definitely, added, at least in a comical manner. But there's usually always some truth behind the comedy. And then also the Spanish. So I do identify on some level with Spanish. It's more because of the Caribbean, which in part has to do with Spain. But like the Dominicans and the Puerto Ricans, more so than the other ones, but on some level also maybe the Cubans. But really the Dominicans, like the Dominican people look a lot like me. And, that's just, I never expected that. Although Jamaica is a small island, growing up as an infant there and being born there, and that's what I know. I mean, had I not seen a plane, never seen a boat, I would have just assumed that's the entire earth surrounded by warm waters of the Caribbean. But, being able to get on a plane and go to Canada, that changed my perspective of Earth immediately. Whereas even as an infant, like in my mind, it was almost like, where are we going? I was so comfortable. But I was grateful, and got to see the white snow of Canada as a child, as an infant even. I know I was seeing that as an infant. I didn't know what it was called, but I know I was seeing it. That I know. And I know that I know that. That's not a guess. So yeah, that covers the racial privilege component. The other ways that I do feel privileged, just so you might as well know, definitely as a Jamaican, I feel a lot of Jamaican privilege given Jamaica's economic position in the West Indies, the Caribbean, the Third World, even with regard to other white, non-white, and black communities. As a brown man, I said the Indian part, the Spanish part, yeah. All right, and then the other way, even when it comes to poverty, I feel the privilege of poverty. Having time and space, being defined as an indigent, impoverished group, but, as a result, having time to relax, rest, eat, and put my ideas out there because I'm not pressed all the time by hard labor. That's one privilege of poverty. But I also do feel the privilege of wealth, and the wealthy part has to do with, in some ways, the relativeness between the economics of Jamaica versus the economics of Canada, and the economics of the United States, the economics of Ireland, Britain, and Australia, as well as the economics of Germany, and even Spain and France. And also, obviously, on some level, but to maybe a lesser degree or in a different way, China, and then also maybe Japan, and the Middle East. You could say compared to every country. South Africa, obviously another one. Ethiopia. But yeah, anyways, it's a slightly relative thing on that. Yes, it's on an absolute scale. So even though we can use the relative thinking to understand it, on an absolute scale, I probably would fall into the poorest groups on Earth, but just not the extreme poor. And that is where my privilege of wealth comes from. Because while Jamaica is probably in the lower tertile or of economic ability, given the size of the country. It's a small island. Look it up on a map. Get the exact measurements if you want. Put a comment on that. I'd love to see that. I can do it myself right on Google Maps, but if someone else wants to do it, go right ahead. And then also the population. Jamaica only has about 2.5 million people. And if you consider race and intelligence and you really subscribe to that thinking, and I don't think that stuff is wrong, but I don't think it discounts the ability of black people. If you consider the racial makeup of Jamaica, that would also put us at an economic deficit, given that we have we only have 1% to 3% white people, white Caucasians, and maybe, 5% or to 15% Indian Asian, and then really 85% to 90% black Congoid 6 people. Some people call it culture. I don't think culture is the most intelligent way to really describe that, since we know so much about neuroanatomy, cognitive ability, and human variation. But, I don't dismiss that term culture for too much of the time, since it's a lot to go list every factor all the time over and over again. But yeah, culture does become a part of the genes either way. Okay, guys? And I can describe that using calculus if you really want to know. We can even make a computer model to show how culture eventually becomes a part of the human genome too. All right. But anyway, my point is that, yes, I have a lot of privilege. A lot of privilege in many different ways. I even have privilege through immigration, my parents migrating to Canada and then to the United States, which makes me a wealthy Jamaican on some level. Just not joking. Because the people on the island of Jamaica who want to ascribe to these things but have never left the island just won't know until they either read books and save their money and then eventually travel, or they just won't know. They'll just die not knowing. They'll have ideas, but it's one thing to have ideas and illusions and even delusions. It's another thing to get out there and figure it out and to know. And I'm definitely in the latter group. While ignorance can be bliss, living my entire life in ignorance would be a travesty. So I get out there and figure out how I have to go to make sure that I do know. So that wraps up my 3-part vlog on privilege. Again, view, like, subscribe, comment, share. And I look forward to working with you all. So have a great time.